This Quadcast podcast is brought to you by the book Finding Jesus. A fundamentalist preacher discovers the socio-political and economic teachings of the Gospels. By me, Herb Montgomery. This is my story as a successful preacher who unexpectedly encountered the gospel stories through the interpretive lenses of various marginalized communities. And what I found radically changed my life forever. Finding Jesus by Herb Montgomery is available now on Amazon. This Quadcast podcast is brought to you by the book Finding Jesus, a fundamentalist.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Second Cup with Keith podcast. I am Keith Giles, and as you can probably tell, I am producing myself. So working out a few bugs and kinks here on the brand new live streaming version of the Second Cup with Keith podcast. But we're back, and I want to thank all of you for joining me now. Some of you are joining me now, I see already live, and it's good to be back, I'll say. A couple of comments. Hello. Yeah, we got a comment there. Doa Deer. Hello from Idaho. Hello to you. Care Bear 42. Good morning. Good morning to you as well. This is technically not my second cup. This is a third cup of tea. I've already had my 2 cups of coffee. But you know, who's counting? So I'm back. I guess let me do a little bit of housekeeping and explain a little bit about what's going on. First of all, why we went away, why we're back, and what you can expect going forward. And technically, I guess this is Second Cup 3.0. I started the Second Cup with Keith podcast initially just as a live streaming thing on Facebook. It wasn't really a podcast. I would just jump on Facebook Live randomly whenever I had something and wanted to get off my chest. And I did that for probably 6 to 8 months, maybe even a year, just kind of randomly do that. And I would call it Second Cup with Keith. And then a friend of mine was starting a little thing called Ethos. It was like it was an app that you could download different radio shows. I helped him. I did some copywriting for him, some ads for that. And in sort of payment for that, he let me sort of create a podcast, which was something I wanted to do, a solo podcast. So made it official. That was the first official podcast of Second Cup with Keith. Then that went away, sadly. But around that time, we launched the Quadcast Podcast Network. And I thought, hey, I'm going to move it over to the Quadcast Podcast Network, and did that. And even a book came out of that. I did a book called Second Cup with Keith on the first 32 episodes. In each episode was sort of a chapter in that book. Go check that out if you haven't. But then I put that on pause, I think about 6 or 7 months ago. I put the Second Cup with Keith podcast on pause. And some of you know it's because that's around the time this thing I was doing called the God Squad, which started off on John Fugelsang's show, then kind of became its own show as well. In addition to the John Fugelsang segment on Wednesday nights, it became a Thursday night live show and podcast. A few months later, did that for a year. And my final show was right after the election with the God Squad. The God Squad is still going, so please keep listening to them and following them. December and Dylan are doing a great job covering that. I decided, you know what? I don't want to be known as the politics guy. I'm a little sick and tired of talking about a certain person that has taken up way too much headspace in my brain and in my life for the last, over 8 years now. Coming up on a decade, you know what I mean? Like every single day, you start your day with that person's name or face, reacting to what that person said or did that outrages you. And I just don't want to do it anymore. Now, it's inescapable, really, but I can certainly take control and take charge of this for myself and say, there are other things I want to do with my energy, with my time, with my intention. And certainly now that we're entering a phase where it will be even more inescapable, at least for the next 4 years, hopefully only in the next 4 years and no longer than that. But here's something significant, and this is a bit of a confession, as well as hopefully, again, just a little more background on this whole thing that happened. Excuse me. So basically, around the time that the God Squad really was just getting started as a segment on John Fugelsang's show, if you were following me closely, then you know that that's right around the same time. This was around September, October of last year. I was really excited about, I had just sort of this big epiphany, right? And I wrote several blog posts about what I call the answer to everything. I did Second Cup with Keith episodes. If you go back and listen to those, some of the final ones I did before, I talked about the second deconstruction. And I was very, very excited by this idea. Two things. One, the main idea is that separation is an illusion, that reality it truly is that we are all connected. We all have a shared divinity. That is we all have a shared connection with God, with the divine, and we all have a shared humanity. And that this is something that is proven through quantum physics, and something that mystics have been talking about for centuries, for millennia. And this same truth is found in Buddhism, many other mystics like Rumi and Black Elk, the Gospel of Thomas, which I just published a book on, all that, right? So I was very, very excited by that. And coupled with that was a quote by my favorite philosopher, Socrates. And it's a quote that I've always loved, but took on greater significance for me because of this epiphany that I had. Again, try to keep in mind, this is the time frame of just before the God Squad thing starts to take off. And the quote from Socrates is this: the way to change the world, right? I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, if you want to change the world, if you want to make a difference, if you want to move society forward, if you want to raise human consciousness, whatever it is, right? Here's how you do it, according to Socrates. You accomplish this not by fighting the old way of thinking and being, but by building the new. In other words, you focus your attention, you kind of ignore the status quo. Your energy is like, if you want to move things forward, you're not going to move things forward by just constantly criticizing the way things are and why they suck. Most people know they suck. And but if you want to capture their imaginations, if you want to help them raise their own consciousness, you want to help them move forward into something new, then what you do is you start building the new. You start showing people what the new looks like, right? You start demonstrating to them, hey, here's what it's going to look like when the new thing actually that we want to create is here, right? Jesus does this when he talks in the Sermon on the Mount, when he talks about the kingdom of God. He says the kingdom of God is within you. It's here right now already, and here's what it looks like. But what he starts describing to them is something that they can't see, something they are not experiencing. When he says that, in this kingdom, blessed are the poor. Well, they're looking around and going, well, in the reality I live in now, the poor are not blessed. But you're talking about you're talking about the way things could be and should be in this new reality of the kingdom of God, right? In the kingdom of God, we love not only those who love us in return, we love even our enemies. because these are the things that God does. Now, these are radical ideas, but the way Jesus presents the ideas is not so much by turning to critique and the old system. Now, he does do a little of that. You can't paint a picture of the new without, in some ways, of course, if nothing else, challenging the concepts of the old, right? So anyway, that's what I was excited about. And that was my personal epiphany. And I was so excited again, go back in time last October. And what was that going to look like? I mean, it was exciting to me because I didn't really know exactly what it was going to look like, right? I knew it was going to involve my blog. It was going to involve my podcast. It was going to involve writing books, all the different ways that I have to communicate to people a picture and an image of this new dynamic, this new, exciting, amazing thing. Again, around the idea that we're all connected. Because I was also, by the way, and I still am, very convinced that it really is the answer to everything. I think the more we as human beings can truly wrap our brains around this idea that we have a shared divinity and we have a shared humanity, and we can begin looking for that divinity in one another, and we can then begin looking for that shared humanity in one another, it does change everything. It allows us to, when you look at someone who you would typically think of as someone you don't like, someone you disagree with, someone you are at odds with, right? Quote unquote, your enemy. If you can find a way to look for the divine in that person, you might say to look for the Christ in that person, the best in that person. And even to see yourself in that person, because you are connected to that other person as if they were you, as if the stuff that makes them them is the stuff that makes you you. And we can get into this as we go forward, but just understand that, right? Like, well, then I can't hate that person. I can't hurt that person, harm that person, insult that person, because I am forever reminded when I look at that person, I don't see the other. I see a reflection of my own face, my own humanity, my own divinity. And this is kind of, again, getting to what Jesus talks about when he says, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done it to me, because you have, because Christ is in that person. So that's the divinity side of it. But there's also this idea of recognizing that what you do to others, you've done to yourself, right? And so, and all that language is wrapped up in things that Jesus talks about as well. So Jesus was, I believe, trying to help us have a vision for this idea that these other people, Gentiles, pagans, Samaritans, Pharisees, fill in the blank, that they're not other, that ultimately, at the most basic level, they are as human as you and as divine as you. You should look at them and see a reflection of Christ, of God. You should look at them and see a reflection of your own self. And when you do that, it will radically change the way, it will change everything. It'll change the way you relate to them. You can only relate to them with patience, with love, with compassion, with understanding, because these are the things you would want extended to you. So you would extend those things to them. Anyway, all of that to say, these were the ideas that I was really excited about last October. But then this God Squad thing comes along, and I love John Fugelsang, and it was an honor to be invited on his show even once. I've been on a couple of times before that. But then to be invited to come back like every week, like, could you do this every week? Wow. Like I'm going to be a regular weekly guest on this show. And then hearing the feedback from John and from his listeners, like this was one of the most popular segments of his show on Sirius XM radio every week. That John was on a tour, like every weekend, John was going on tour with the Sexy Liberals comedy tour. And no matter what town he went into, at the meet and greet afterwards, everybody was telling him how much they love the God Squad. So look, that's building my ego, of course, right? Oh my gosh, something that I'm doing is getting attention nationwide on a nationally syndicated radio show and podcast, right? And it's just becoming more and more and more popular, and more people love it, and how great it is. And these are great things, right? It was my idea. This is the thing too. I can't act like somebody roped me into this, right? I came up with the name The God Squad. I invited December. Dylan was part of this equation because I recommended him as well. So, it's my idea to say, hey, this thing's taken off. Let's make a podcast out of it on Thursday night. So, I helped promote that as well. So now 2 nights a week, I'm spending all this time and energy talking about politics, right? And again, the thing about politics is it's an us them equation, right? It's and trust me, for a year I tried to be the person in the conversation who humanized the other, who tried to see the good in the other. If you listen to those God Squad episodes that I was a part of, you'll see how poorly I did, how I failed nearly completely to do that, right? Because it's really hard, you know what I mean? It's hard to talk about things that people are doing and things that people are saying that are so hateful towards other groups of people, right? They are entirely focused on an us-them mentality, and then you're reacting to them having an us-them mentality, and you're on the other side of that. You're the them to their us, right? And so there's a defensiveness, right? You have to justify, you have to contradict. And again, I'm not saying those things are wrong. I'm just saying that was my participation in that. The more I did it and the more popular it became, the more difficult it became to disengage from it, the more difficult it became to not get sucked into it. And so the less and less I was personally focused on doing the thing I was so excited about, which was to help people, to build the new, right? I was now stuck in, and I created my own prison. I created my own, trap, and I walked into my own trap. I created a trap where I was incentivized and motivated to fight the old. And I fought the old for a year until I said, you know what, I really it's about time that I stop fighting the old and I get back to what I was excited about, 8, 9 months ago, or now a year ago, to really get back to what does it look like to build the new? Trust me, people are going to keep fighting the old, and I'm glad that they're going to do it. And I think that's great. But I personally needed to disengage from that and shift myself fully and completely, or as fully and completely as I can at this moment, into building the new. And for myself, even just trying to figure out, what is that? What does it look like to build the new? Because I honestly don't know. I have some beginnings of ideas, and I'm going to share some of those with you here, some things that are coming up. But I'm just excited about that. And I want to apologize that it took a year off from that. And I kind of took this detour, but I want to say, I think maybe that was necessary. I think I needed to experience that. I needed to understand just how difficult this was going to be, that it's not as simple as just flipping a switch. I'm probably always going to, hopefully not always, but I think for a long time, it's going to be difficult for me to maintain this focus on building the new. Because again, there's just going to always be a daily, there's going to be an endless supply, let's put it that way, over the next 4 years of temptations to fall into critiquing and fighting the old. I'm going to say I'm going to be doing my very, very best to do as little of that as possible, to do less and less of that. And I recognize now more than ever that it's going to take a whole lot of energy to do that, right? But I'm going to put my energy into that, to building the new, whatever that means and whatever that looks like, right? Care Bear says, yeah, it's such a simple message, and then we go and complicate it. Exactly. And it's also very difficult to maintain that vision. Like even once you awaken to that idea, it's hard to keep your attention on it, your focus on it. As I am a living example, as I just shared. So you can have the amazing epiphany and then spend a year going the opposite direction. So I'm going to read some comments here. Let's see. Yeah, so Doa Deer says, interesting. I love that. Start building the new thing. How? Question mark. Well, I'm going to try to figure that out, right? And I think it looks different for everybody, just to try to sort of address your question. I only know what it could look like for me, right? I am who I am. I have certain platforms. I have a blog on Patheos. I have this podcast. I have Heretic Happy Hour. I'm an author. I'm a publisher. I publish books. I do online courses. I'm going to talk about something coming up next, in January that I'm going to be doing, and also something in December that I'm going to be doing. So I'll talk about that in a second. So I've already begun to think about what building the new for me will look like. But building the new for you, or anyone else listening, building the new for you could look very different, right? Maybe you're a school teacher. Maybe you're a doctor or a lawyer, or you own your own business, or I don't know, right? Maybe you're a musician. So maybe building the new for you would be writing songs about this new thing that you want people to have an imagination for. And by the way, too, I think your new, quote unquote, new, whatever that new thing is, it may not be the same as mine. Like mine is very specifically this concept that I think is radical and powerful, that changes the world, is this idea of our shared humanity and our shared divinity. I think if I can truly see the other person as myself and as God, that I cannot help but love them and have empathy and compassion for them and see them as someone worthy of dignity and respect and all of that, right? I think if we as humanity on this planet, the more and more we embrace that idea and move in that direction, the less conflict, the less arguments, the less violence, the less poverty, etc. Because we will see this other person not as another person, but as God and as ourselves reflected back to us. And then we will be motivated to do something, right? It's very, very action oriented. So I think it's different for everybody. My kingdom is not of this world, I think means not in the same realm of thinking. Exactly. It's a very different way of thinking. Woodyer says, imagine people thinking God is right here among us and they still feel comfortable being themselves. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So let me see. John Sinke. Hey, John, love you, man. I love you. He said, sounds good, Keith. Yeah, it does sound good. So let me talk a little bit about then what some of that's going to look like for me. Obviously, a big part of building the new for me is going to be this brand new weekly Second Cup with Keith podcast, which I'm going to dial it in. I'm going to get much better about self-producing this show once a week, and also the podcast, which will go up right afterwards. So I will use this platform once a week for an hour or so to build the new here in this space, hopefully with you, with listeners who are also curious about what does it mean to build the new and how can we do these things. And so maybe we'll come up with ideas right here, right? Every Monday, we'll come up with ideas of how we can build the new together, or as individual and going our own separate ways. Here's how I'm going to create and build the new in my own world. So now sometimes that's going to be like this, where it's just going to be me sharing some ideas and going, hey, I got these great and fascinating ideas I want to share with you, to hopefully spark you and inspire you to see and build the new in your own world, in your own life, in your own reality. Sometimes I want to have guests. So sometimes I will have a guest come on. And there's a couple of people that I have already been talking to who are on the same page with me on this, which is very exciting, by the way. It's very beautiful to know I'm not alone in this. And I will say also, these are people that are much better at this than I am, because when I see what they're doing, it inspires me. And I say, ah, man, that's it. I should be doing that. Or I want to do that. I want to do something like that. And I'll just tell you, I mean, you may already know, I interviewed several of these people already on Second Cup with Keith, again, about a year ago. These are people like Melissa Denise, Angie Von Slaughter, Heather Hamilton, Glenn Seipert. I think my friend Herb Montgomery understands this as well. And several others, right? So I would like to have them and others come on. Mary Terhune is another one. And her book, Out of the Blue, by the way, is fantastic. It just came out last week. It's the second edition of her book, originally published by Hay House Publishing. The second edition published by Quire. Wayne Dyer gave an incredible endorsement to her book when he was still alive. And this book is even better now than that book because we have an updated version of it. I interviewed her again about a year ago on Second Cup with Keith. Her book is now out. I really recommend reading Out of the Blue. Go check that out. It's so good. But I'd like to have her on again and talk. And so these are just some of the ways that I'm going to at least begin to build the new. So here we go. Here's a quote. Not a quote. Here's a comment, sorry, from someone under the name Laugh Anyway. The comment is, this concept is revolutionary. I struggle with my divinity versus my humanity, recognizing that we all have a shared humanity and shared divinity is a lovely, mind-blowing way of thinking outside myself. Yeah, I think it's really powerful. Yeah. And I think the more, and obviously there's different things we can do ourselves individually to continually remind ourselves of that. Cause I think it's easy to have sort of momentary flashes of awakening about that. Like, I think you can have moments where you think, you stop and you meditate or you think on that and it blows your mind. You're like, whoa. And then literally the next instant, you could just totally forget it and be back into this other way of thinking, of sort of operating within this illusion of separation. Because that's what it is. It's an illusion. But obviously there's things we can do, right? There is meditation. Meditation's super helpful. One thing that's helpful for me is just practicing gratitude. Another thing is being creative, whether I myself am involved in doing something creative or whether I'm enjoying the creativity of another person. So whether that's reading a book or artwork, looking at artwork, or music, listening to music, those kinds of things, right? Those things, those moments bring me watching films. You know me, you know I love movies. And obviously there are examples of those kinds of expressions of art that are better than others at leading us to that and maintaining that awareness of our shared humanity and our shared divinity. But they're out there, and maybe we could even do a show where I talk about that, some of those things. Like I could do a whole show about like the top 5, top 10, top 20 films, right, that help us cultivate and nurture this awareness of our shared humanity and shared divinity. That could be a show. Maybe I'll do that next week. Who knows? Or at least coming up, I'll do that. So yeah, so those are some of the ways. I want to read something. Hope you don't mind me reading. I published a blog post today, and I'm really excited about it. Again, this is another example of ways that I am wanting to move us into seeing the new and building the new, experiencing the new, creating an imagination for the new, and specifically this sort of shared humanity, shared divinity, all that kind of stuff. So I wrote this article. It's called Fragments of a Lonely God, and it's fascinating to me the way this came about. I write in my book Sola Mysterium about something called idea space, and it's this idea, it's this concept of the fact that that ideas exist, and that ideas want to be born, and so when an idea sort of ripens in the idea space, which is this sort of other dimension where ideas exist and float around, they're all out there right now, and when an idea's time has come, that idea will ripen. And if your antenna is up, if you're there if you're tuned into that frequency, when that idea also attunes to your frequency or to that frequency, you'll catch it, this idea, and it's the right time. And sometimes they come from different places. They don't all necessarily come from sort of the same source. And so this is what happened to me over the last couple of days. I was on Instagram. I'm just scrolling through. At some point, I must have followed this guy named Duncan Trussell. He's a comedian, and he's a creator. He's a writer, and he did a show called The Midnight Gospel. It's on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, I actually haven't watched all of it. I've only watched a couple of episodes. Really interesting stuff. Anyway, I'm scrolling through Instagram and I come across this video clip of Duncan Trussell, and I'm just going to read to you what he says, because I couldn't figure out a way to pull in the video and play it live, like play the audio for you. So you're going to get to hear me reading what he says on the video clip. So he says that he was at a Ram Dass retreat. Ram Dass is another like mystical guru guy who totally gets this oneness and humanity and divinity thing. So anyway, he's at one of these retreats with Ram Dass, and he said they had these bumper stickers, and the bumper stickers say, all capital letters, all one. Again, emphasizing this idea that we're all one. And he says he took some scissors and he cut one of the L's out of that and pasted it back together so that it said alone. And now this is what he says on the clip. He says, you can't be more alone than if you are a totality. There's no one to talk to. It's just you. It's all one. So what do you do to combat that loneliness? Well, you invent a universe populated with beings, and you get lost in that universe in some desperate attempt to deal with the infinite, horrifying, never-ending sense of being alone. We are the fragments of a lonely God. Love that. We are the fragments of a lonely God trying to entertain itself and desperately trying to not remember that we're all one thing. All the hippies are like, you're going to merge with the universe, man. And I say, no, you don't. You merge with the universe and your first thought is going to be, I'm going to paraphrase here, oh crap, I'm back. Damn it, it was all a dream. And I love that because I don't think he's wrong. I think he's right. But he presents a very fascinating sort of a little bit of a twist on this idea of the illusion of separation. That this idea of this illusion of separation is intentional. That in some ways, the ultimate consciousness, the ultimate divine consciousness, is responsible for creating the illusion in the first place. In other words, the illusion wasn't created by some dark force or by darkness or ignorance, or I think a lot of times that's the way it kind of gets communicated, right? That because this idea of separation is an illusion, it's our ego, it's the world system, right? It's something, if not nefarious, something, how do I want to say it? But just something not good, right? Not necessarily evil, but also just not good. Kind of a neutral illusion, right? Anyway, but what he's talking about, and again, this isn't new. He's expressing something I think a lot of mystics have talked about. But to think of it this way, like we live in this universe that that is constructed as an illusion of this separation that we have. But that's on purpose, because the all one didn't want to be alone. And so, as a way for the universe, for the all one to not experience loneliness, but to experience connection and community and relationship, that's why creation was created, right? That's why all of us as individual expressions of the one consciousness behave as if we are each separate individual consciousness is expressions of consciousness, the divine consciousness. That's on purpose. And the goal is the relationship. The goal is the connection. I in my book Sola Deus, which was the follow-up to Sola Mysterium, in Sola Deus, I wrestled with this pretty seriously. This was a big personal wrestle for me. I was wrestling with it from the perspective of the sort of the tension between the concept of pantheism, which is the idea that God is everything, and panentheism, which is the idea that God is in all things, but is not all things. Okay. And I started off initially as a panentheist, but I started slowly drifting over to pantheism, that God is all things. But what kept me from fully going into the pantheism direction was this realization that whatever this is, there's still a relationship. It is about relationship. That the whole point seems to be about some sort of a relationship between myself, my individualized expression of the divinity, and my relationship with others, expressions of the same divinity, and my relationship with the divine consciousness. That if you remove the relationship, that there kind of isn't anything left, right? Other than, as he's saying, the all one. Like, okay, there's this infinite oneness, but now there's no more relationship. And so I, in that book, sort of came to the conclusion that there is this paradox. And in a way, it's both. It is pantheism, but it's also panentheism. And that's a paradox. It can't be both, but it is. Somehow it is. In the same way as an evangelical Christian, I couldn't explain the Trinity, but I believed it. I also believe that reality is somewhere between this intersection of reality where both pantheism and panentheism are both true. I can't explain exactly how, but they are. Go read Sola Deus if you want me to go deeper into that. So anyway, that just kind of sparked my imagination on that. And then, like the next day, I get an email. I get this email newsletter from this guy that I follow, and every Sunday he puts out a new one. And he had a couple of things, two things in this newsletter that, again, I was already thinking about the Duncan Trussell quote when I was reading it. So that's part of it. This is what I'm saying, where I think the universe is sort of sending me messages. I'm tuning into this. And so first I hear the Duncan Trussell thing because, again, my antenna's up. I'm tuned to this idea. So I catch it. And then now I'm thinking about it. And now that I'm thinking about that, this other thing comes to me through this newsletter on Sunday morning. And now that gets added to the swirl. It gets injected into the thought process. And there were two things in the newsletter. One of them was a quote by a guy named Robert Bresson, who I do not know who this person is, but the quote is this: that painting, he says, painting taught me that things don't exist in themselves. They're created by the relations between them. I'm like, whoa. So again, this is about this relationship, right? Without the relationship between you and I, remove the illusion of separation, remove the relationship between you and I, and we're one. So we don't exist anymore in ourselves. The only way we exist in ourselves is for there to be a separation so that there can be a relationship. Okay, wow, that was cool. But then, because this guy's a comic book creator, he was also talking about in comic books. If you had a single image, if you go look at the blog, if you go read the blog post, it's on keithgiles.com. The post is called Fragments of a Lonely God. Go check it out. Because there are visual aids that I can't share with you here. But one of the panels is it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's like 6 panels. I'm sorry, 7 panels. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 panels. And if you remove the panels, which is the separation between those images sequentially laid out, you just have a picture of a bunch of trees and some birds flying. But when you put the lines in between them and you create these 7 panels of separation within the single image, you have now created the illusion of space and time and separation. Without that separation, there is no space and there is no time. So I guess this is the additional component that I found fascinating, was that when the All One experienced this infinite aloneness and then wanted to experience relationship, it had to create not only division, separation, the illusion of separation, so that there could be relationship. That's also the exact moment that space and time are created. Now, I don't know if that blows your mind, but that's just an additional element to this equation that really makes me go, whoa. I just think that's very, very fascinating. So I just did my best in this blog post to sort of think that through and make sense of that, right? So, so if you take the quote and make it about humanity or creation, it takes on this other meaning. And so my paraphrase is that people don't exist in or by themselves. People exist or are created by the relationships between them. And I think that's kind of, in a way, a paraphrase of what Duncan Trussell was saying. So the fact that we exist as separate expressions of the one consciousness, the one divine consciousness, proves that the relationship is the point. The whole point of creation, the whole point of the reality we are currently inhabiting is relationship. And if so, now we're pulling it back into the us and them conversation. So yes, it's about relationship. And that relationship can look different ways. And we can decide what form that relationship takes. That relationship we have with others can take on a very strong us and them tone. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm good, you're bad. Right? Or whatever, fill in the blanks. That is a relationship. It's not a good one. And it's not a relationship informed by the reality that we are the same. At our essence, we're not the same in our beliefs. We're not the same in our opinions. But we are the same in our essence. We are the same shared divinity. We are the same shared humanity. And if we can have a relationship across those differences, religious, political, ethnic, cultural, whatever it happens to be, this is what we need to do. At least I say this is what I really want to learn how to do and do it well, is to find better ways to relate to people who appear to be other than me, who I would typically want to think of as a them, but to relate to them, to have a relationship with them, because again, that relationship is the entire point. But to have a relationship with them completely and totally informed by, permeated by, saturated by the awareness that I am reflected in them and they are reflected back in me. And to look for those ways, because they're there. We have to, again, it takes energy and effort, but we can find that shared humanity and shared divinity if we're looking for it. I've talked a lot about in terms of, I used to be with a group called Peace Catalyst International. I wrote a book about nonviolence, Jesus Unarmed. So I'm really into this whole concept of loving your enemy and all that. And again, I know that's not easy, blah, blah, blah. But what I've talked about a lot is that in every relationship, there are two paths we can take. We can focus on all the ways that we're different. And if we do that, if that's the beginning of our path, if we take the path marked focused on differences, that path will begin with argument, with disagreement. It might move on to contempt. It might move on to violence, and ultimately it might move on to death and war and death. That's, to me, the path I don't want to walk. I don't want to walk on that path anymore. So I want to be fully committed to this other path, which begins with, I want to look for what we have in common. And it may be really, really hard at first to see what we have in common, but if I keep looking, I will find it. And if I begin the relationship by walking with that person on the path of what we have in common, that path leads to conversation, that leads to dialogue, it leads to understanding, it leads to friendship, it leads to connection. Ultimately, that path leads to peace. And I don't know about you, I could use some of that. I feel like we are standing in the doorway right now, and especially in just a few months, where every single thing you consume, all the media you consume, I don't care what side you're on, by the way, every tweet, every post, every Instagram reel, every blog post, every news clip, every television show, everything you consume is going to be polarizing you into one side or the other. In other words, we are being driven as a collective consciousness in America, probably in the world, but certainly just this focus right now on America. We are being ushered down a path marked, focus on your differences. That's where we're headed. People that are afraid of civil war in America, get off that road. If you feel like that's where we're headed, then refuse to walk that road. I mean, it's going to take a gargantuan, Herculean effort not to get sucked into that. I know that. I spent a year being sucked into that. It is so hard to break out of it. But I'm telling you, we can't walk that road. We cannot walk this road of let's only look at how different we are and while we're right and they're wrong. If we walk this road, which is the us and them road, that road leads to conflict, arguments, potentially violence, potentially war, potentially death. I don't want to walk that path. I don't care how many people are telling me this is the right path. This is the right way to go. I'm not going to walk that path. If nothing else, I want this podcast and what I write and what I communicate and what I'm doing with my life to be focused on this other path. To be focused on this path of what brings us together. And really learn to see the good, the God, the Christ, the humanity of the other person. Can we see ourselves reflected in the other person? Could we do that? Well, I don't know, but I'm going to do what I can to try and figure that out. That's what I want to try and figure out. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this podcast. I promised, I said I was going to do something and let you know there was something coming up. Before I do that, let me real quick look at some comments here because I've just been talking and I haven't paid attention to the comments, and you guys have really been going to town. Oh my gosh, so many comments. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to them. So Adoa Deer says, thank you for taking the detour. I believe it'll be worth it. And let's see, right now I just see taking care with every moment to just be kind and not to argue. That's one way. Laugh Anyway says, this concept is revolutionary. I struggle with my divinity versus my humanity. Recognizing that we all have a shared humanity and shared divinity is a lovely, mind-blowing way of thinking outside myself. Yeah, love that. So Ralph has a question. Ralph Youngson has a question. I agree with Ames, but I'm stupid. I'm sorry, I'm not. He didn't say he was stupid. I'm stumped. I'm stumped over how human nature will change in Moss. 8 billion people plus new generations and new challenges. How do you think our deeply evolved, conflictual, and competitive nature will be changed, and how might this have downsides too? Fantastic question. What I would encourage you to do, 2 things. Well, maybe 3 things. Look up spiral dynamics. So I have a book, Sola Deus, where I have a whole chapter on spiral dynamics. If you go to my blog, keithsaws.com, and scroll through there, you can find or search there. I did a blog post on spiral dynamics. So I recommend you look up spiral dynamics. That's how it happens. And the encouraging thing about spiral dynamics is that it's absolutely proof, historical proof, that we as humanity, we really are moving through these levels of raising our human consciousness. And so it's already happening. To answer your question, on one level, it's already happening. It feels like we're taking 2 steps, maybe 3 steps back right now, but that's part of the process too. Like it is a constant back and forth, right? So we're going to take steps forward, but then we're going to get pushed back a little bit. It's going to feel like, oh, we're not going to make it. But we've been doing this for thousands of years. And it's the way we've moved from very individualized, selfish levels of human consciousness to the level of consciousness we're at now, which is at least at a level of consciousness where we do recognize some of the things I'm talking about. Not everybody does, right? Even some people who know it, forget it. And I'm one of them. So it's even once you think you know it, you can very easily fall back out of it again. So it's a fight, even individually, personally, to stay there, to keep aware of that. So Doa Deer says, if I am one part of this whole of God, then the troubles of this world, are also my doing. Thank you. I elected what's his name, even though I didn't vote for him. That makes a better future possible. Well, I want to say yes and no to that. What I like about what you said, again, if we really hold this idea in our mind, then this shared divinity and shared humanity. One of the great things, one of the positive things it helps us to do is when bad things happen in our world, hurricanes, tornadoes, wars, pandemics, whatever, or just personal tragedy, someone we love, or we ourselves, we get sick, we get cancer, or someone dies in a car accident, whatever. We lose someone we love. We cannot look to God and say, God, why did you let that happen? Because we recognize that we're not talking to a God up there somewhere separate from us. That if we're going to address God, quote unquote, we're addressing humanity because God is in us, right? If God is the one in whom we all live and move and have our being, guess what? It works the other way too. We are the ones in whom God lives and moves and has being. That means whatever you're doing and I'm doing is what God is doing, like it or not, good or bad. So when bad things happen, we can't turn to God and say, God, why did you let that happen? Or God, what are you going to do about it? That desire, that question that wells up in us should be reflected back to ourselves. What am I going to do about it? And have I allowed that to happen? Am I the one that let that happen? Or am I the one that's going to continue to allow that happen? to happen, right? It prevents us as humanity from offloading all of this to a God somewhere out there. It makes us realize, no, the kingdom of God will come to this earth when it comes to us. When Jesus says the kingdom of God is within you, that's what he's talking about. That's one of the things he's talking about. The kingdom of God is only real to the degree it's real in you, and then from you to the world that's around you, the actual world we live in. In other words, we have to bring the kingdom of God from heaven to earth. As it is in heaven, may it be on earth. Well, we're the ones that make that happen. We're the hands and feet of Christ. God has no body now. Jesus has no body now, but you. So yeah. Let's see. And then so Doa Deer again says, we are limited human beings. Yes, we individually are limited, but collectively, just as an example, human beings right now, if we wanted to, we could end war. We have the capacity. I mean, we could just decide we're not going to fight anymore. When our governments tell us to go fight, we say no. When our governments tell us to hate the other person, we just say no. There it is. We can do it. We have the power to end war. We could end poverty. There is more than enough resource in this world right now on planet Earth to feed every single person. But why don't we? Like, we can't blame God for that. We're the ones holding it back. Humanity is. So humanity can solve this problem. We can solve most of the major problems in the world today. War, famine, poverty. We can solve that. Humans can do that. But we don't. So why don't we? That's the question we should be asking. We are the ones and the only ones who have the power to change it. Things are the way they are because we made them this way. And if we made it, we can unmake it. Ralph Jungson says, let me pull up his quote here. David Bentley Hart's view on this, as if God is lonely, it frames God as psychologically finite person in anthropomorphic terms. I love David Bentley Hart. If you know me, you know that. And I love him very much. I would love to talk to him about that because I don't think that's necessarily the case. In other words, I don't think we're anthropomorphizing God by attributing this idea of loneliness to God any more. That I think if you're going to take that path, I would challenge that idea by saying that if you're going to say that loneliness is a human trait that we're projecting onto God, then you can't project love onto God either. How can God love? How is love any more or less an anthropomorphized concept than loneliness? And I would also say human beings experiencing loneliness or love or compassion comes from God. The Bible even says that, right? That love comes from God. It doesn't come from us. So love is not something humans created. It's something that God is, and God, because we're made in the image of God, it's sort of hardwired. It's coded into the human experience. We cannot help but experience love because love is who God is, and that's who we are. And I would argue that loneliness is part of that too. That's the human experience. But interesting concept, yes. So let's see. Dorothy Parker says, yes, I agree. It's like love. It only exists in relationship to hate. When one is gone, neither is relative. Yeah, I've heard the comment or the quote. The opposite of love is not hate; it's indifference. It's apathy, right? Yeah. So again, Dorothy says, does that also mean God only exists in relationship to creation? No, at least not according to what I've talked about here, where, in other words, it all began with the all one. So God is the divine consciousness that existed before there was any creation. All there was God. So God's existence isn't dependent upon our existence. Our existence as little pieces of God exist because God decided to create creation, right? And creation is a breaking apart into separateness for the purpose of relationship. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Doadir says, so without separation, we don't form relationships to become reunited. You hit my goal at the moment, how to relate across the divide. There you go. Let's see. Well, God bless you. Doadir says, I guess I'm going to have to read your books, Keith. Glad I found you. Well, me too. And I hope you enjoy those books. So let me see. Just reading through some of these comments. I think Ralph here is responding to previous question. I would say no, as God would then be contingent on creation, and then creation would not be creation. That's right. Let's see. Laughing Away says, I heard that the word devil comes from diabolus, which means division. I don't know about that. I'll have to look that up. I've not heard that, so cannot comment either way. Yeah, so anyway, thank you all. This is great. Ralph again says, thanks, Keith. I would say love is a positive overflow. Loneliness is a lack. Let's see. I don't know, though. That's something we're thinking about, I guess. I guess you could say it's a lack, but what is it a lack of? It's a lack of relationship. And relationship is impossible if you are the only consciousness that exists. Then it's impossible for you, if you were the only consciousness in the universe, wouldn't you be lonely? Yes. Why? Because there's no other consciousness but you. So, yeah, it's sort of a byproduct of oneness, I would say. Yeah, I guess this is the deal. It's very difficult for us as human beings, the way humans experience loneliness, to conceive of a different kind of sort of a divine loneliness that predates human consciousness and human experience. So in that sense, I think the anthropomorphizing gets in the way of fully being able to understand it, right? There you go. And then Dorothy says, love is an emotion we attribute to God. Yes, or is it an emotion? Again, humans have emotions. But 1 John says God is love. Not that God feels love, not that God expresses love. God is love. So that's interesting. I mean, you could think about this concept of loneliness from the concept of love as well. I mean, if you are love, but there's no one but you, then you love, but what do you love? You only love you, right? But if you create this illusion of separation and you create all of these other just billions and billions of different, wildly divergent, uniquely special, smaller consciousness expressions of yourself, then they can love one another and you can love them. But without that, you can't, right? Right. Anyway, there you go. That's the deep theological, philosophical conversation for this episode. I promised you I was going to tell you about something coming up along the lines of what I'm going to be doing to build the new, and I'm going to do that, and then we're going to sign off. Also, last year, something that I did with my friend Angie von Slaughter was we created a group reading through Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And that was a lot of fun. And by the way, that book, if you haven't read that book, even if you're not a creative person, by the way, you are, even if you don't think you are. It's one of the things the book says, that everyone's creative. You may not know it, you may not define it that way, but ultimately you cannot help to be creative in some way. Anyway, but that book is like just a mind-blowing, powerful, profound book. It's a spiritual book. It's not just a book about creativity. It's a book about mysticism, about reality, about God, about humanity, about reality. It's a spiritual book. I mean, it could be my new Bible. It's so good. So we did a book group on that. Had a lot of great conversations around that, and that was so much fun. Angie and I want to do another round of this. We called it the course we created was called Creatas, and so we want to do another course. So we're going to do one starting in January. It's going to be an 8-week course. It's going to be more of a sandbox, whereas the first class was going through just kind of reading through the book, and we did a lot of talking about being creative because that's the nature of the book. But this time, what we want to do in this new course that we're starting, it'll start in January, is we want this course to be about not talking about creativity, but about being creative, about actually creating a little sandbox where we can play, where everybody involved in the class can create something. And whatever so if you already have sort of a creative outlet or expression, you're a writer, you're a poet, you're a painter, you're a musician, you're a dancer, you're a sculptor, whatever, you're a filmmaker, whatever it is. You are a creative person and you have a creative expression, a creative talent. Then what we're going to do is spend 8 weeks together, and every week we're going to have basically an assignment. There's going to be homework, and you're going to spend the week working on the project, and then we're going to do a Zoom call together, and we're going to do a little show and tell and talk about what we created. And sometimes we'll even be challenged to create things outside of our box. So let's say if you're a poet, we may ask you to do a painting. If you're a painter, we might say write a song. If you're a songwriter, we might say write a script or a play, or I don't know. You know what I mean? But just to break out of your norms, or to maybe do the thing that you are good at, to practice your creative ability, but to do it with different tools, to do it from a different direction, to approach it from a completely different angle. Again, just looking for ways to further spark our creativity. And this is, I think, again, for me, creating the new is a creative process. It involves imagination. It involves this idea space I'm talking about. So there'll be a free live webinar next month. I think December 14th is the date, and I'll start sharing links and information for that. People can sign up for that. So Saturday, December 14th, I think 9 a.m. Pacific time. Angie and I will do a live free webinar. We'll talk about this course and our vision for the course and creativity in general and all those things. We'll invite you to come and be a part of that for free and see if this is something that you'd be excited about taking the class. Of course, we'll always have a discount code, so you can, if you join the webinar, you can register for this course at a discount. But then we'll open it up to everybody after that, and the course will start in January. It'll be a Wednesday night, so every Wednesday evening we will be doing a live Zoom call together to talk to you and other artists, to talk about creativity and again, doing things creatively in the world to hopefully build the new and all that. So yeah, this, thank you. Doa Deer says this class sounds wonderful. I hope it will be. Creation was the beginning of living others. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, this will be fun. Looking forward to that class. And I guess that's it. Thank you all for listening to this episode. I'm very excited about relaunching the podcast. So I'll see you here every Monday morning. The goal will be every Monday morning around 10 a.m. Mountain Time or 9 a.m. Pacific Time. And we'll spend an hour or so together talking about these kinds of things. Sometimes I'll have a guest. Yeah, it'll be fun. And thank you all for listening and for being a part of this, whatever this is, learning how to build the new and to lead us hopefully down a path of reconciliation, restoration, healing, connection, a path to peace. That's what I want to be about. And I hope you're excited as I am about joining it. Thank you all so much for being here. And we'll see you there next time. Take care. Bye-bye.